luz y progreso. This is tu brujo favorito, el boricua, sancista, Brujo Luis. So I want to introduce you to one of the greatest loves of my life. Mi isla borinqueña, Borinquen, Puerto Rico. So I am at my mother's house, la casita de mi mamá, in the rural mountain side that is known as Rio Hondo, in the pueblo de Comerío, Puerto Rico, which is in the center of La Isla, in the center of the island. Like most towns, most pueblos in Borinquen, Comerío received its name from the Taino people, from the Arawak people. So the rural mountain valley of Comerío was named after a cacique. His name was Cacique Comerío. He was born around what is today modern-day Turabo, Caguas, and he died around the year of our Lord 1519. He was the son of a great cacique. His name was Bagwe Name, and he was the brother of El Cacique Caguax. Now, although I was raised in the United States, every summer we would go to Puerto Rico. And I remember thinking as a little child that Puerto Rico was in heaven. I remember we would go on the plane and you would see the clouds, of course, and then a few hours later, the clouds would part and there was Puerto Rico. And so I remember thinking to myself, oh, Puerto Rico's in heaven. That's one thing that I remember. Now, there was always three things that made me realize that I was in Borinquen, that I was in Puerto Rico. The first was the sound of El Coquí, the national rainforest tree frogs of Borinquen, the aroma of Puerto Rico, the aroma of La Isla, which I always described as a combination of aguacate, avocado, yuca, cassava, and plátanos, or plantains. And I always knew that I was in Borinquen when I stood in front of La Montaña, this magical mountain that was always the view when I would wake up in La Isla. This is when I knew I was in Puerto Rico. Now, there's a habit that I've always had ever since I was very little. When I wake up, I like to sit down for an hour. And I just like to meditate and observe my surroundings. One of my greatest loves was to wake up every morning since I was a child until, adulthood, sit in la veranda or the porch where my mother lived and to look at la montaña in front of me in this valley in Rio Hondo, Comerío. The magic of just looking at that mountain view. Ever since I was little, I remember thinking, God must live up there. I think God lives on top of ese punto, that point where that mountain is. Not realizing that I was connecting with my Taino roots. I also remember waking up really early because if you wake up in Puerto Rico in the morning, especially in the valleys, the valles, La Montaña was always covered by nublina or nieblas, mists. You couldn't even see the mountain. And I love to see the mist disappear. And today you see a rainbow. The rainbow is La Sierpe, the seven-headed rainbow serpent of the Taino people, Iguanaboina. So from September 15 to October 15, we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And on October 9th, which was once called Christopher Columbus Day, but now we know it as El Día de la Raza, or Indigenous Peoples Day, I want to show you my Borinquen, my Puerto Rico. Mi isla, that side of Puerto Rico that not too many people see outside of San Juan and the capitals, into the island, into that path, that road that very few tourists venture. And I want to talk about a side or story of me that I've never told until today. This will be the first time that I speak about this. So come along with me, and I hope you enjoy. So I was born in the year 1969, and both of my family, both on my father's side and on my mother's side, they were known as Los Jíbaros, or mountain people. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the word Jíbaro is a Taino word, or has Taino origin, that comes from the word Shibalo. And it's similar to the word Los Siboney in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, or Los Guajiros, the Guajiro of Cuba. So the first people of Borinquen, of Puerto Rico, a lot of people say they were called Taino. In fact, they were not known as Taino. Taino, the word Taino means buena gente. We are of good people. And that's how they saluted Christopher Columbus. We would have been known as Los Caniba, Los Babeque, Los Banaque, Los Shibalos. Now, during the time of the Taino people, right, what we call the Taino people today, there were clans, right? These clans resided within Casiascos or Yucayeques. And in Borinquen, there was the Bat clan, the Turtle clan, the Frog clan, and so on and so forth. Clans were replaced by the Jíbaro people. So if you go to Puerto Rico today, most Jíbaro families are known by certain names. So you'll hear La Familia Las Paletas, La Familia Los Sapos, La Familia Las Tortugas. My family, on my mother's side, they were known as La Familia de los Barracos. And the reason they were known as La Familia de los Barracos is because they raised and sold pork, to make a living. Now, in Puerto Rican families, in Jíbaro family, no one is called ever by their names. In fact, I didn't know my uncle's names, my tíos' real names, until much later in life. So we have apodos, nicknames, and this could have come from the indigenous people, we don't know, or it could have come from Europe, but I had Tío Chucho, Tío Chiquín, Tío Guiso, Tío Monche, who I thought that was their names for the longest time until I grew up. My father, he was known as Azuquita, okay? I had a cousin, his name was Yuca, or his nickname was Yuca. We had my cousin Guito, my cousin Ñañi, my cousin Preto, my other cousin La Negra, and my brother, my younger brother, he was known as El Canito. El Canito because he was white. He was very light colored in complexion. My nickname from very young was El Brujito. And the reason it was El Brujito is because I was a nature boy. From the moment I came out of my mother's womb, I loved to explore la naturaleza, nature. Ever since I was a young little boy until today, I've always enjoyed exploring nature. I always felt el bosque, los montes, was entering into like a magical place, a place of spirit and just magic. It was my secret garden. I remember I would often get a good beating by my mother because I would disappear for hours. But in the bosque, in the woods, I would speak with spirits, and I would speak with, everything was alive. The trees were alive, the stones were alive, the water was alive. And I didn't realize that I was connecting with my indigenous side. And although my family practiced espiritismo criollo, folk spiritism, rural folk spiritism, I never realized that I was connecting. I always connected with the element of water, los ríos, right? The rivers. I never realized that I was connecting con mi guía principal, my principal spirit guide, mi cacique en cabeza, mis espíritus de agua dulce, los espíritus de Taimaní. I was connecting with Cachita Tumbo, my Opia, my ancestors. I was connecting with that indigenous side, and I never realized that until much later in life. So here is where the story thickens. On my mother's side son puertorriqueños. They are Puerto Rican, but they are very light-skinned Puerto Rican, son blanquito, and they have Germanic blood from Andalusia, Jewish, and Celtic blood. My father's side, they're more trigueñitos, more morenos, and they have indigenous Arawak, Roma Gypsy, and North African blood. And this is where el refrán, el dicho puertorriqueño, la mancha del plátano, ni el jabón ni la plancha lo quitan de encima de mí, or the stain of the plantain is not easily removed, comes into play. So when I was younger, I was always closer to my mother's side of the family, lo blanquito, the white side of my family. I was never really close with my father's moreno or my father's indigenous side. I remember that I was closer to my mother's side of the family. I wanted to be and look like my mother's side of the family, the white side of my family. And I shunned and wanted nothing to do with my father's brown indigenous family. So what I'm saying is I always identified more with my European white side more than my indigenous side. Now, although in Espiritismo and since I was very little, everyone always used to say, tú tienes un indio que te guía. You have your principal guide is an Indian spirit, un cacique. Mi cacique encabeza el indio del agua y mi santita, my patron saint, Cachita Tumbo, an aspect of Guabonito, Cuatrisque, which is a path of the Semi Atabe. Now, although I always knew I had these indigenous spirits that guarded me, I didn't come to fully acknowledge or accept them until I got married, and which I was very young, and my wife, she became pregnant. And early on the pregnancy, she was around a month into the pregnancy, I had a dream. And in that dream, I saw two babies. And they were brown. They were brown skinned. And so I remember waking up telling her, you're going to have twins. And she was like, tú estás loco, you're crazy. So I remember we went to go make breakfast. And when I broke the egg, one egg, two yolks came out, two yolks. And I remembered my dream and I told her, you're going to have twins. So 9 months passed, and in the summer of 1991, in a hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, my twins were born. And they had the complexion of my father's side. They were morenitas, they were Indias. They had that Arawak complexion. I remember as my babies were growing up, my twins were growing up, I remember, wow, look at them. They have my father's side of the family's complexion. And look at that. All these years that I wanted to be más blanquito, and here, Dios me dio, God gave me these beautiful Indias, these beautiful borinqueñas, Tainas. So shortly after the birth of my twins, there was a singer, a very famous singer, Dominican singer, a singer from La Isla de Quisqueya. His name is Juan Luis Guerra. And he came out with an album titled Areito. And in that album, there was a track. And it was titled Naboria Daka, Mayani Makana. And I remember not understanding any of the words that he was saying in that song, but he was singing in Iyeri, the Arawak language that would have been spoken by the Tainos in Quisqueya, in Borinquen. And I remember listening to those words, not understanding anything, and crying, feeling my soul, the tears coming out of me, and that remorse for not connecting or or ever getting to know deeper level, my father's side of the family. So a few years after that, Ancestry.com came out with a test to find out your ancestry. So I decided to pay for it and take the test. And the results surprised me. So here I looked at my results, and I had a big portion of Spanish blood from southern Andalusia, Spain. I had Celtic blood, Germanic blood, Romani, Gypsy blood, North African, Moroccan blood. But what surprised me very much was that I had 15% indigenous blood from Puerto Rico, 5% indigenous blood from South America, and 1% indigenous blood from Central America. So here we are today, and as a criollo, a Creole man, a triracial man, a Boricua, I embrace all that I am. I embrace that I have European blood. I embrace that I have African. And I embrace that I have Taino indigenous Arawak blood. And that all makes me whole. And as a spiritual man, I also embrace all the spiritual and religious paths that have been part of my journey. I accept my European Catholico Christian baptism and early religious teachings. I accept and embrace my criollo espiritismo folclórico. I embrace my African infused Sanse tradition, and I also embrace with all my heart and all my soul my Neo-Taino Seminismo tradition. It's 500 plus years of historia, history. To accept them all is to accept one's ancestry and know thyself. And remember, la mancha del plátano no se quita, ni el jabón ni la plancha lo quitan de encima de mí. So in closing, a few years ago, I had done a video here on my YouTube channel on a Taino adaptation, a modern prayer to El Padre Nuestro in the language that the Taino may have spoken during the time. And I remembered many people were very accepting of the prayer. And then I had some members of what I call the Comecacs clan, los Comecacas, right? Criticizing that prayer. Listen, I pray to my spirits del corazón, right? I pray to Yukahu, I pray to Atabey, I pray from my heart, and I adapted these prayers into my spiritualities because me nace del corazón. It is born from my heart, and I like to say them from my heart. So here are those prayers again in closing. Oración a Yucaú, el Padre Nuestro. Guakia Baba, Turei Toka, Guamikeni, Guamicarayagüe, Guarico, Guaquia, Taino Ti, Bomatu, Búsica, Guaquia, Ajeca Sabi, Uracawa, Maboyawa, Yukiyuyan Semi Naboria Daka, Han Han Katu. Oración a la madre del agua, la madre de la luna y la madre de todas las mujeres. Oración a Atabey. Bibi Atabey, Atabeira y Hermao, Guacar, Apito Suimaco, Ate Itaboera, Coiba, Mamona, Aturo, Ayaguaquia, Itiba Cajubaba, Acona, Guaquia, Arahuaca, Yermau, Guaquia, Wali, Huaca, Yari, Búsica, Guaquia, Ajia, Jude, Taikuya, Buya, Naboria, Daca, Han Han, Katu. So I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Much love, much respects. I love you all very much. Thank you for all the followers, and I just want to say Jahom, muchas gracias. Ven aquí va, Guajía, Yukiyu, Titoca, que Dios me lo bendiga a todos, que los buenos espíritus que esté con todo el mundo los acompañe, los bendiga, le dé fuerza, le dé estabilidad, le dé fortaleza. Un fuerte abrazo siempre. Tu brujo favorito, salsista, Brujo Luis. Chao.